The subterranean holding vaults of the Sovereign Gavel in London did not smell of history. They smelled of raw pine lumber, heavy silica desiccants, and industrial chemical preservatives. Situated directly beneath the rain-slicked stones of Mayfair, this underground bunker served as a multi-billion-dollar purgatory for the world's most coveted treasures. Upstairs, in the main exhibition hall, Russian oil tycoons, American tech moguls, and European royalty sat in velvet-cushioned seats, sipping hundred-year-old scotch while bidding fortunes on pieces of human heritage. Down here, the air was maintained an absolute, freezing 55 degrees Fahrenheit, with 40% humidity, a mechanical womb designed to keep ancient wood from rotting and oil canvas from cracking. Working in the dim, shadow-drenched corner of Vault 3, far away from the polished glass display cases, was Malik Beho. Malik was a 54-year-old man of West African descent who possessed the towering, unyielding presence of an ancient oak tree. His skin was a deep, midnight ebony lined with the sharp, weathered creases of a life spent in heavy, silent labor. Tonight, he wore a coarse, grease-stained navy blue canvas worker's jumpsuit, his thick leather boots covered in a fine layer of grey sawdust. His massive, colored hands that looked as though they could crush a cinder block were currently operating a heavy pneumatic staple gun, securing the structural foam inside a massive, reinforced shipping crate. To the elite art dealers and aristocratic auctioneers upstairs, Malik was an invisible piece of the machinery. He was just a low-income cargo handler from the London docks, hired to lift the heavy burdens that the high society elite were too delicate to touch. But the elite world had constructed their architecture on a foundation they did not understand. 10 years ago, Malik Beho did not wear a stained canvas jumpsuit. He was known within the highest inner circles of global heritage preservation as the curator, the anonymous, multi-billion-dollar venture capitalist who owned the supreme title deeds to the Sovereign Gavel itself. He was the world's most prolific private collector of antiquity, a man who possessed a diplomatic passport and a personal security clearance that could freeze international shipping corridors with a single phone call. But when his son was born with total, irreversible optic nerve blindness, Malik withdrew completely from the public eye. When his son Kofi grew older and displayed an unnatural, near-miraculous cognitive ability to evaluate historical artifacts purely through touch, Malik did not buy him a museum. He wanted his son to learn the weight of truth without the corrupting influence of wealth. To protect Kofi from the predatory vultures of the black market art trade, Malik hid his sovereign executive keys in a biometric vault, assumed a falsified identity as a migrant laborer, and took the lowest-paying job in his own facility. For 5 years, he had worked every single day in the sawdust, watching over his boy from the dark. "Father," a quiet, rhythmic voice called out from the darkness of the loading lane. The heavy thud of Malik's pneumatic gun stopped instantly. He disconnected the air hose, wiped the cold sweat from his dark forehead with a rag, and turned around. The stern, immovable expression on his face dissolved into a look of profound, protective warmth. Walking slowly into the light of Vault 3 was Kofi Beho. He was a 19-year-old young man, tall and slender, wearing a simple, faded black cotton shirt and holding a sleek, lightweight graphite blind cane in his right hand. Kofi's eyes were a cloudy, milky white, staring blankly ahead, but his head was tilted slightly, his ears tracking the subtle echoes of the concrete room. He moved with a supernatural grace, his left hand extended slightly, his fingers fluttering in the air like sensitive instruments detecting atmospheric pressure. In his left hand, Kofi held a velvet-lined leather tray containing a piece of jewelry that had arrived from the royal vaults of Eastern Europe just 2 hours ago. The crown of the Palaiologs, a 15th century Byzantine artifact valued at 80 millions sterling. "Kofi," Malik said, his deep, rumbling baritone dropping into a gentle whisper as he stepped forward to steady his son's shoulder. "You shouldn't be handling the high-value registry alone down here. The security supervisors are looking for any reason to cut our hours." "The supervisors are upstairs drinking champagne, Father," Kofi said, a small, intelligent smile touching his lips. He set the tray down on Malik's wooden work table. "Lord Sterling ordered me to bring the crown down to the crate line for final sealing before the VIP preview begins at midnight." "But, Father, look at my hands." Malik looked. Kofi's long, elegant fingers were trembling slightly, his fingertips pressing gently against the heavy gold filigree of the crown's base. "What is it, son?" Malik asked, his amber eyes narrowing with a sharp, sudden intensity. "The thermal conductivity is wrong," Kofi whispered, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings of the imperial crest. He didn't need eyes. His brain was processing the micro-texture, the microscopic grain of the metal, and the exact weight-to-volume ratio at a cellular level. "The weight is short by exactly 42 grams. The gold alloy isn't 15th century Byzantine, it's an electroplated tungsten core with a low-purity 9-carat gold wash. The emeralds are synthetic green corundum. Father, this isn't the crown of the Paleologs. The artifact in this tray is a modern, flawless counterfeit." Before Malik could reply, the heavy iron security door of Vault 3 hissed open with a sharp release of hydraulic pressure. Lord Alastair Sterling marched into the room. He was the chief auctioneer and regional managing director of the London branch, a man born into British old money nobility, wearing a bespoke three-piece Savile Row suit, his platinum hair combed back perfectly, a gold monocle chain hanging from his vest. Sterling was a corporate predator who viewed the world through the lens of transaction values, treating his laborers like cattle. "What is taking so long down here?" Sterling barked, his sharp, aristocratic accent echoing coldly against the concrete walls. He marched directly toward the wooden table, his eyes locking onto the tray. "Gbeho, why is your blind brat lingering over the asset?" "That crown is the anchor piece for tonight's gala. The Russian delegation is already in the gallery." "Lord Sterling," Kofi said, turning his milky white eyes toward the sound of the man's heavy leather shoes. He stood his ground, his voice remarkably steady. "This asset cannot be displayed. The gold density is incorrect, and the tool marks on the inner rim indicate a high-precision CNC laser cut, not hand-hammered Byzantine craftsmanship. Someone has switched the original artifact. This is a fraud." Lord Sterling froze. Malik watched the exact microsecond the villain's eyes widened in a flash of pure, venomous panic. Sterling didn't look surprised because of a mistake. He looked terrified because his £70 million insurance fraud scheme had just been exposed by a blind 19-year-old boy in a basement. Within a heartbeat, Sterling's fear transformed into a mask of absolute, aristocratic rage. He stepped forward, his hand swinging out with brutal force, striking Kofi's graphite cane out of his hand. The cane clattered violently against the concrete floor, snapping into two pieces under Sterling's leather shoe. "Silence, you useless, sightless animal," Sterling roared, his voice trembling with elite venom as he glared at Kofi. "You are a low-wage, disabled assistant hired out of charity. How dare you question the verification certificates of my house? You touched it with your filthy, unwashed hands, and now you claim it's fake. You have just compromised an £80 million royal asset." Malik Gbeho took one massive step forward, his towering 6'3" frame instantly blocking the light, his shadow falling over Lord Sterling like a tectonic plate. His amber eyes burned with an ancient, terrifying fire, his fists clenching until the leather of his work gloves groaned under the kinetic tension. "Step back, Sterling," Malik murmured. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrational frequency, the sound of an avalanche beginning to slide. "Take your hands off my son." Sterling backed up half a step, momentarily paralyzed by the sheer physical authority of the man in the dirty canvas jumpsuit. But he looked at the sawdust on Malik's boots, remembered his own noble title, and a cruel, triumphant sneer returned to his face. "You want to play the protective father, Malik?" Sterling hissed, pulling out his digital security radio. "You and your freaked-out son just committed an act of gross negligence and potential corporate sabotage. I was going to let you finish your shift, but now you're done. Security. Code red in Vault 3. Get these 2 African vagrants off my floor and call the Metropolitan Police. I'm holding them liable for the structural damage to the crown." Sterling looked at the broken cane on the floor, smiling with the absolute satisfaction of a man who believed his wealth made him a god. "Your son will spend the night in a concrete cell, janitor," Sterling whispered. "Let's see how well his precious little fingers can read the texture of iron bars." Malik did not look down. He did not beg. He slowly reached toward the neckline of his canvas jumpsuit, his fingers tightening around a hidden chain beneath the cloth. The hour of the servant was over, the house of cards was leaning, and the sovereign owner of the history they traded was about to lock the gates. The sound of Lord Alistair Sterling's voice through the digital security radio echoed down the concrete corridor like the dry snap of a whip. Within 60 seconds, the heavy iron security door of Vault 3 was forcefully thrown open, and 4 large private security guards dressed in black tactical uniforms stepped inside. They carried heavy composite batons, their faces hard and unmoving as they instantly formed a restrictive circle around the wooden work table, separating Malik and his son from the exit. Lord Sterling, the lead security supervisor, said, his hand resting on his belt as his eyes flicked between the towering frame of Malik and the pale, blind boy standing beside him. "The corridor is secure. What are your instructions?" "These 2 migrant laborers have just attempted to sabotage the crowning centerpiece of the Royal Byzantine exhibition." Sterling lied smoothly, his aristocratic voice dripping with a calculated, theatrical malice. He picked up the velvet-lined leather tray containing the counterfeit crown, holding it as if it were a holy relic. "The blind boy has intentionally mishandled the asset, claiming it is a fraud in a pathetic attempt to cover up a theft or drop the value. I want them detained, their personal lockers searched, and the Metropolitan Police brought down here immediately." "That is a lie," Kofi said, his milky white eyes staring blankly into the distance, though his head remained tilted toward the sound of the guard's heavy boots. His long, sensitive fingers were still resting on the edge of the table, tracking the subtle vibrations of the room. "The base weight of that gold is wrong, and the tool marks under the secondary emerald setting were made by a modern automated mill. Lord Sterling knows this, because he signed the custom clearing manifest from the private Antwerp laboratory last Tuesday." Lord Sterling's face flushed a violent, deep crimson. The panic in his eyes returned for a fraction of a second, hotter and more desperate than before. The blind boy hadn't just guessed. His touch was so refined he had accurately identified the exact laboratory where the tungsten counterfeit had been manufactured. If the police arrived under a standard report, a real investigation might look too closely at the international shipping logs. "Silence, you insolent little freak," Sterling roared, stepping forward and intentionally kicking the remaining broken half of Kofi's graphite blind cane across the concrete floor until it slammed into the drainage grate. He turned to the security supervisor, his face twisted into a mask of pure, corporate ruthlessness. "Change the report. They didn't just misdiagnose it, they dropped it. I saw this old man pull the crown out of the protective foam case. with his grace-stained hands and drop it onto the hard edge of the shipping crate. Look at the top crest. The central cross is bent. That is 80 million pounds of sovereign historical heritage, ruined by a clumsy, uneducated porter. The security supervisor looked at the crown. The central gold cross was completely straight. There was not a single scratch on it. But he looked at Lord Stirling's custom Savile Row suit, thought about his own monthly corporate salary, and slowly pulled a pair of heavy iron handcuffs from his tactical vest. "Understood, Lord Stirling," the supervisor said, stepping toward Malik. "Sir, put your hands behind your back. Do not resist, or we will use force in front of the boy." Kofi's breath caught in his throat, his body instinctively shrinking back against his father's solid frame. "Father, they're setting us up. They're going to blame us for the fake crown." Malik Gibeho did not move an inch. He stood like a massive, ancient mountain of black marble, completely ignoring the security guards who were closing in on him. Slowly, he reached down to his right hand, pulling off his thick, sawdust-stained leatherwork glove and tossing it casually onto the wooden table. Then, with a calm, freezing deliberation, his large fingers reached toward the neckline of his navy blue canvas worker's jumpsuit. He didn't pull out a hidden weapon. He reached inside his shirt and pulled out a heavy, platinum master seal pendant hanging from a thick titanium chain around his neck. The medal didn't bear the name of the sovereign gavel, nor did it have the crest of London's high society art boards. It was a pristine, laser-etched medallion bearing a single ancient symbol, the sovereign curator, compliance master logix. "Stirling," Malik said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly deep baritone that filled the cold room like the rumbling of an earthquake before the mountain splits open. "Look at the chain." Lord Stirling sneered, leaning forward with his gold monocle to look down at the janitor's neck. "What is that? Some cheap voodoo trinket from your village? Do you think a piece of scrap metal is going to protect you from a federal prison sentence, Malik?" But as the harsh white fluorescent light of Vault 3 hit the surface of the platinum medal, a tiny, high-frequency blue LED light inside the core of the pendant blinked twice. Instantly, the digital security console mounted next to the heavy iron door gave a sudden, shrill electronic chime. The screen, which had been displaying the standard red security lock of the London management, went completely black for one terrifying heartbeat. A millisecond later, every digital device inside the subterranean bunker, the security radios on the guards' belts, the inventory tablets in the supervisor's hands, and the high-definition internal cameras monitoring the vault flashed with a single, massive string of emerald-greened, prompt text. "Supreme internal audit initialized. Local authority suspended by master node and hours and 1. Owner encryption online." What is that noise?" the security supervisor gasped, his radio suddenly throwing out nothing but static and high-pitched military data tones. "My terminal. It's locked out. It's rejecting my fingerprint." Lord Stirling's arrogant smile froze on his face. He stared at the platinum medal around the black man's neck, then looked up into Malik's amber eyes. For the first time in 15 years, the British nobleman felt a cold, paralyzing dread grip his spine. The symbols on the medal weren't tribal. It was the master biometric access key to the global mainframe of Vanguard Antiquities Group, the multi-billion-dollar sovereign private equity fund that actually owned the land, the vault, the building, and the global trademark of the sovereign gavel. "You told my son he belongs in a concrete cell, Alistair," Malik murmured, his towering 6'3" frame straightening to its full, magnificent height as he looked down at the ruined nobleman. "You told him that because he cannot see the light. He doesn't understand the texture of history. But you forgot one thing about this house." Malik reached out, his massive hand catching Lord Sterling by the silk lapels of his expensive suit jacket with an immovable, iron grip that made the nobleman's breath instantly catch in his throat. "I built these vaults to protect human history from thieves like you, and tonight, the architect is closing the door." The heavy, cold air of Vault 3 seemed to solidify as the power network of the building's digital core began to hum. Lord Alistair Sterling felt the coarse wool of his bespoke Savile Row lapels twisting under Malik's immovable, iron grip. The nobleman's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, his aristocratic face turning a deep, suffocating shade of purple as he found himself lifted slightly off his expensive leather heels by a man he had treated as a ghost for 5 long years. "Unhand me, you lunatic," Sterling choked out, his manicured fingers clawing desperately at Malik's bare, muscular forearm. "Guards, what are you doing? Strike him down. Use force." The 4 private security guards stepped forward, their heavy composite batons raised, their faces masks of pure tactical intent. But before the lead supervisor could swing his weapon toward Malik's shoulder, the high-frequency blue LED on Malik's platinum pendant emitted a continuous, piercing tone. Instantly, the heavy iron security door behind them slammed shut with a violent, pneumatic crash. The overhead fluorescent lights died, plunging the vault into absolute darkness for one terrifying heartbeat. When the backup systems kicked in a millisecond later, the room was bathed not in the clean, white glare of the gallery, but in a pulsing, industrial crimson emergency light. From the wall-mounted communications speaker, a synthetic, automated female voice overrode the entire building's network architecture. "Security lockdown protocol mandate. Delta 101 active. All local administrative privileges permanently revoked by overload master compliance. This facility is now under sovereign retrieval control. My terminal. It's throwing back military-grade encryption," the security supervisor yelled, dropping his composite button as his tactical handheld device began to violently smoke, its lithium-ion battery short-circuiting under the sheer force of the external network intrusion. "Captain, the main breaker is rejecting our emergency codes. We are completely sealed inside the structural core." Malik slowly released his grip on Lord Sterling, letting the ruined nobleman drop onto the concrete floor like a heavy, discarded sack of laundry. Malik did not look at him. He turned his imposing, 6'3" frame back toward the wooden work table, his large fingers casually reaching for the master communication panel built into the reinforced steel frame of Vault 3. "Father," Kofi whispered, his cloudy, milky white eyes blinking softly as the heavy vibration of the building's central ventilation dropped into a dead, suffocating silence. He held onto the edge of the table, his sensitive ears tracking the chaotic breaths of the room, the internal relays. "They're shifting upstairs. The main gallery elevators just hit their mechanical emergency stops." "I know, son," Malik murmured, his deep, rumbling baritone carrying an absolute, untouchable authority that completely filled the crimson-lit bunker. "The wolves have run this estate for 15 years, Kofi. It's time to show them who owns the soil." Malik entered a 6-digit cryptographic key into the master console. The small obsidian screen flashed with white text. "Global SAL satellite relay commencing. Destination, internal compliance commons and Interpol chief directory." Upstairs, in the grand exhibition hall of the Sovereign Gavel, the elite world was in the middle of a multi-million-pound bidding frenzy. Russian energy magnates, American venture capitalists, and members of the British House of Lords sat with their crystal champagne flutes raised, waiting for the curtain to rise on the main attraction, the crown of the Paleologs. Suddenly, every luxury display terminal, every private bidding screen, and the massive 50-foot digital projection wall behind the auctioneer's podium blinked out in perfect synchronization. The sophisticated classical string quartet playing in the gallery stopped instantly as the main chandeliers died, replaced by the same pulsing crimson emergency bars bleeding down from the ceiling. Before the wealthy patrons could panic, the massive projection wall illuminated with a high-definition, unedited video feed. It wasn't a live stream of the royal crown, it was an advanced, split-screen forensic accounting ledger. On the left side were Lord Alistair Sterling's private offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, detailing a £70 million wire transfer from an international art forgery ring based out of Antwerp. On the right side, a scrolling log of encrypted internal emails written by Sterling himself surfaced, meticulous, cold-blooded logs detailing the exact blueprint for replacing the original Byzantine artifact with an electroplated tungsten replica to secure a massive fraudulent insurance payout. "What is the meaning of this?" an American billionaire shouted from the front row, his glass shattering against the marble floor. "Is this a cyber attack?" "Look at the top of the ledger," a member of the House of Lords gasped, pointing a trembling, diamond-ringed finger at the screen. Floating above the absolute evidence of Sterling's corruption was a pristine, platinum seal that every major financial institution and museum board on Earth recognized with immediate dread. Vanguard Antiquities Group, Office of the Supreme Curator. Below the seal, a live digital ticker showed that the entire forensic package, along with every byte of customs fraud and asset tampering, had just been legally transmitted to Scotland Yard, the International Criminal Police Organisation, Interpol, and the British Heritage Licensing Board, under an unshakable corporate compliance execution. Back down in Vault 3, Lord Sterling stared at the tiny security monitor on the wall, watching his entire life status, his noble family reputation, and his multi-million-pound empire of elite fraud being systematically pulverized in less than 300 seconds. He crawled backward against the wet concrete wall, his expensive Savile Row trousers soaking up the sawdust from the floor, his face an ash-grey mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "No," Sterling whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine as he looked up at the black man in the dirty worker's jumpsuit. "No, this is a dream. You're a porter. You're a low-wage nobody. You can't just destroy a peer of the realm with a button." "Your peerage was built on stolen history, Alistair," Malik said, his amber eyes looking down at the weeping nobleman with the freezing, absolute finality of an executioner. "You told my son that his touch meant nothing because he is blind. But you forgot that the man who builds the dark is the only one who knows exactly what is hidden inside it." Malik turned his back on the chief auctioneer, taking his son's hand. "Come, Kofi, let's go upstairs. The gallery is waiting for the final rating." The grand marble staircase leading from the subterranean vaults to the main exhibition hall felt less like a pathway to luxury and more like the ascent to a high court. Malik Beho walked with a slow, heavy deliberation, his boots leaving faint traces of grey sawdust on the immaculate white stone stairs. Beside him, Kofi walked with absolute poise, holding the snapped pieces of his graphite cane in his left hand, his right hand resting lightly on his father's solid forearm. As they stepped through the heavy velvet curtains into the grand gallery, the atmosphere hit them like a physical wall of noise and panic. The 300 members of high society millionaires, lords, and international collectors were standing in chaotic clusters, their voices raised in terrified whispers. The crimson emergency lights continued to pulse rhythmically across the room, casting an ominous red glow over the gold-framed oil paintings and Renaissance sculptures lining the walls. On the massive 50-foot projection screen behind the auctioneer's podium, the ledger of Lord Alistair Sterling's multi-million-pound fraud remained locked in place, an unblinking monument to his corruption. "There he is. The dishwasher, no, the handler," a voice shouted from the center of the room. Arthur Pendleton, the senior chairman of the Sovereign Gavel's International Board of Directors, stepped out from the crowd. He was an elderly man with a face lined by decades of high society politics, his expensive tuxedo damp with cold sweat. Behind him stood 3 senior members of the London Police Department, their expressions grim. "You," Pendleton yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Malik's canvas jumpsuit. "What have you done to the mainframe? Who gave a common cargo laborer the authority to override a sovereign secure network? Turn it off immediately, or I will ensure you spend—" Before Malik could speak, the heavy glass doors at the rear of the gallery burst open. Lord Alistair Sterling stumbled into the room, flanked by the 4 security guards who had been trapped in the vault with him. The nobleman was unrecognizable. His custom Savile Row jacket was torn at the lapel, his hair was disheveled, and his face was completely hollowed out by fear. He lunged forward, grabbing Chairman Pendleton's arm with a desperate, white-knuckled grip. "Arthur, arrest him. Arrest both of them," Sterling screamed, his aristocratic accent cracking into a high-pitched hysteria that echoed through the silent room. "They hacked the vaults. They staged the ledger. That blind boy intentionally damaged the crown of the Paleologs to ruin the auction. They are trying to extort the house." Sterling turned his venomous glare back onto Kofi, his teeth bared in an animalistic snarl. "You think a piece of digital software makes you important, boy? You are a broken, sightless nobody from the slums. Your father is a dock worker who cleans up my waste. You have no standing in this world, no pedigree, and no voice. I am a peer of the United Kingdom, and my word is absolute law in this gallery. Security, drag them down to the street." The security guards hesitated, looking between their weeping director and the immovable black man in the worker's jumpsuit. Malik slowly let go of his son's hand. He took 2 steps forward, stepping directly into the center of the gallery's spotlight. He didn't look at the police officers, nor did he look at the screaming nobleman. He looked directly at Chairman Pendleton. "Arthur," Malik said, his deep, rumbling baritone instantly silencing the entire room. The tone was devoid of anger, carrying only the freezing weight of an absolute ruler. "Look closely at the face of the man who signs your operating dividends." Malik reached up to his neck, unhooking the heavy titanium chain and letting the platinum master seal pendant swing freely in his hand. He stepped to the primary electronic podium, sliding the medal into the executive biometric port. Instantly, the crimson emergency lights stopped pulsing. The entire room fell dark for one brief second before the grand chandeliers flashed back to life, blazing with a brilliant, blinding white light. But the massive projection screen did not return to the auction catalogue. Instead, it flashed a massive corporate document bearing the international seal of Vanguard Antiquities Group. At the very top of the document, listed as the sole, sovereign owner of 95% of the physical shares of the Sovereign Gavel, was a single name, Malik Gbiho. Chairman Pendleton's jaw dropped so low his monocle fell from his eye, shattering against the marble floor. His knees trembled as he fell back into a velvet armchair, his face completely pale. "Dr. Gbiho, the Phantom Curator? It can't be." "It is," Malik murmured, his amber eyes locking onto Lord Sterling with a terrifying, silent gravity. "For 15 years, you traded the heritage of mankind for personal greed, Alistair. You looked at my son's blindness and thought he was powerless, but his hands understand the truth of history far better than your eyes ever will. Malik turned back to the police officers. The forensic package on the screen is fully verified by the primary Vanguard mainframe. Take him out of my sight. The officers didn't hesitate. They stepped past the frozen board of directors, their heavy iron handcuffs clicking loudly as they secured Sterling's wrists. The nobleman didn't scream anymore. He simply collapsed to his knees, his eyes wide and vacant, as he was dragged across the polished marble floor, his noble name and his multi-million-pound empire permanently erased in a single hour. Malik walked back to Kofi, his rugged features softening into a look of profound, protective warmth. He picked up the broken graphite cane from his son's hand and replaced it with a sleek, gold-tipped walking staff he pulled from the executive display case beside the podium. "Your work here is done, Kofi," Malik whispered, his deep voice filling the silent gallery with untouchable pride. "Let's go home. The real history is waiting for us." Kofi smiled, his cloudy, milky white eyes reflecting the brilliant light of the chandeliers as he took his father's arm. Together, the cargo-clothed billionaire and his blind son walked out of the Grand Gallery, leaving the elite world of London sitting in absolute, breathless silence. The master curator had spoken, the fraudulent gavel had fallen, and the father had claimed his son's victory in the cleanest, most devastating way possible. The London rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Mayfair slick and shimmering like liquid obsidian under the orange glow of the street lamps. Malik Gibeho stood on the pavement outside the grand bronze doors of the sovereign gavel, his large frame still clad in the navy blue canvas worker's jumpsuit. Beside him, Kofi leaned lightly against his new gold-tipped staff, his face turned toward the cool night air, listening to the distant hum of city traffic. Inside the building, the remnants of high society were still reeling from the sudden destruction of Lord Alistair Sterling, but outside, the real architecture of Malik's global empire was already shifting. A sleek, armored black Mercedes Pullman pulled up smoothly to the curb, its tinted windows completely masking the interior. The rear door slid open automatically with a muted hydraulic hiss. Standing beside the door was Julian Vance, the senior managing director of Vanguard Antiquities Group's European division. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s who usually commanded the boardrooms of Geneva and Paris, but tonight his posture was entirely submissive as he bowed his head deeply toward the man in the dirty jumpsuit. "Dr. Beho," Julian said, his voice a respectful whisper, "the international transit logs have been intercepted. We've traced the core network behind Sterling's fraud. It goes much deeper than the London house." Malik did not climb into the luxury interior of the limousine. He stood on the rain-washed pavement, his massive, closed hands resting on his hips as he looked back at the cold stone facade of the auction house. "Explain, Julian," Malik commanded, his deep baritone carrying the heavy weight of an absolute ruler who had just stepped out of the shadows. The tungsten replica of the Byzantine crown wasn't just a localized insurance scam, Julian explained, handing a secure, encrypted digital tablet through the open door. "Our forensic deep dive into the Antwerp laboratory logs revealed that over the past 24 months, 34 high-value royal artifacts handled by the sovereign gavel have been systematically swapped out. The real treasures, ancient Roman gold chalices, French imperial diamonds, and priceless pre-Columbian gold artifacts were diverted to a private, off-grid vault in the Swiss Alps. Sterling was just the broker. The operation is being run by a shadow syndicate known as the Iron Ring, led by a man named Harrison Drake." Malik's amber eyes narrowed into two freezing points of pure steel. Harrison Drake, a rogue billionaire investor who had spent the last 2 decades buying up bankrupt museums and converting public heritage into private trophies for his personal amusement. "And the next shipment?" Malik asked, his voice dropping into a dangerous, baseline frequency. "It's happening right now, sir," Julian whispered, his face growing pale. "The royal sun disk of the Incas, a flawless, solid gold artifact estimated at £120 million. It arrived at our Heathrow cargo hangar 3 hours ago." Sterling's final directive before his arrest was to have the transit crew route the disk through a secondary logistics warehouse in the industrial docks of East London for special preservation coating. "It's a trap, Dr. Gbeho. They are going to swap it tonight before the global press conference tomorrow morning." Kofi took a step forward, his fingers tightening around the gold crest of his staff. He didn't need eyes to see the sudden tension in the air. "Father, the sun disk is the soul of a people's history. It cannot be buried in a private cage. Let me touch the crates. Let me trace the iron." Malik turned to his son, his rugged features softening into a look of profound, protective devotion. He reached out, his massive hand resting gently on Kofi's shoulder. "Harrison Drake thinks he can buy the history of the world because he has enough digits in a bank ledger, Kofi. He thinks the men who lift the crates are too stupid to count the stars. We are going to the East London docks." Malik stepped into the vehicle, pulling Kofi in beside him. The armored door slid shut, sealing out the sounds of Mayfair. As the heavy Mercedes accelerated smoothly into the dark, Malik pulled a specialized military-grade encrypted radio from the hidden inner pocket of his canvas jumpsuit. He turned the dial, bypassing every commercial network corridor until he locked onto the high-frequency satellite link of Vanguard security forces. "This is Master Node 01, Malik spoke into the receiver, his tone carrying an absolute, chilling finality. "Initialize the Midnight Protocol across all UK shipping hubs. Freeze every transport manifest bearing the Vanguard seal. I want the East London industrial sectors completely locked down under an alpha-level corporate sovereign audit. Nobody leaves the docks until I count the gold." Down in the dark, industrial heart of the London Docklands, far away from the velvet ropes and the champagne flutes, a massive logistics warehouse sat beneath the flickering floodlights. Inside, a team of armed mercenaries dressed as high-security couriers were already gathering around a massive iron-bound crate, completely unaware that the ghost who built the sky they traded under was heading down the river to claim his crown. The East London industrial docks smelled of river silt, stagnant diesel, and cold iron. Rain began to fall again, a fine, biting mist that coated the towering stacks of shipping containers in a greasy sheen. Inside Warehouse 12, the air was heavy with the low, rhythmic throb of a massive industrial generator. A single, heavy wooden crate sat beneath the harsh glare of halogen floodlights suspended from the corrugated steel ceiling. Standing around the crate were 6 men dressed in the dark navy tactical uniforms of a private security firm. They carried high-caliber sidearms, but their movements were not those of standard guards. They moved with the hurried, nervous precision of thieves. At the center of the group stood Harrison Drake. Drake was a billionaire corporate raider who treated the world as his personal ledger. He wore a heavy black cashmere overcoat, his silver hair immaculate, his face a mask of cold, unchecked arrogance. In his gloved hands, he held a specialized pneumatic crowbar, pry opening the lid of the wooden husk. As the thick cedar planks gave way with a sharp groan, a brilliant, warm golden glow seemed to fracture the dim light of the warehouse. Resting inside a velvet-lined nest was the royal sun disk of the Incas. It was a massive, solid gold relic, its surface intricately engraved with ancient celestial maps and religious iconographies. It didn't just look valuable, it carried the visual weight of an empire's soul. "Beautiful," Drake murmured, a cruel, triumphant smile stretching across his thin lips. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a modern replica heavy, gold-plated LED disc that looked identical to the naked eye. Swap them out. The transport truck leaves for Heathrow in 20 minutes. By the time the museum inspectors realize the density is off, the original will be sitting in my subterranean vault in Zurich. Mr. Drake, the lead mercenary called out, looking nervously at his digital tablet. The satellite tracking network for the shipping container just dropped offline. The automated customs gate at the entrance, it's not responding to our override codes. Before Drake could bark an order, a sudden, deafening mechanical roar echoed from the perimeter of the warehouse. The massive, three-story rolling steel shutter doors at the front of the building violently seized. The heavy chains ground together with a shower of orange sparks as the automated security systems overrode the manual controls. The massive iron doors slammed down into the concrete floor with a thud that shook the entire structure, completely sealing the warehouse from the outside world. A millisecond later, every single halogen floodlight turned completely black. The industrial generator died, plunging the warehouse into a freezing, absolute pitch darkness. Defensive positions. The lead mercenary screamed, the click of firearm safeties echoing sharply in the dark. Activate night vision. But before the mercenaries could lift their goggles, the emergency backup lights kicked in. They didn't glow with the dim yellow of safety markers. Instead, the entire warehouse was bathed in a pulsing, blinding crimson glare. Every inventory monitor, every digital forklift screen, and every security terminal mounted on the steel pillars flashed with a single line of high-level military code. Total Freight Embargo initialized. All seized under Sovereign Retrieval Order Vanguard Zone 1. From the shadows of the rear loading bay, the heavy thud of leather boots echoed against the concrete floor. Walking out of the crimson fog, entirely unbothered by the raised weapons pointing at his chest, was Malik Beho. He still wore his navy blue worker's jumpsuit, the grey sawdust from Mayfair still dusting his shoulders. Beside him, Kofi walked with slow, precise steps, his gold-tipped staff tapping rhythmically against the floor, his milky white eyes staring blankly yet confidently into the red haze. "Who the hell are you?" Harrison Drake snarled, stepping behind his armed guards, his hand tightening around the stolen golden disc. "This is a private, secure logistics facility. Shoot these intruders." The lead mercenary squeezed the trigger of his weapon. Nothing happened. The digital firing pins of their high-tech, tactical firearms had been completely bricked. The wireless network built into their smart weapons had locked out, flashing the same crimson warning bar as the warehouse walls. Weapon registry compromised. Access permanently denied. "Your toys don't work in my house, Harrison," Malik said, his deep, rumbling baritone cutting through the panic like a physical blade. He stopped 10 feet from the crates, his towering 6'3" frame casting a massive, unyielding shadow across the stolen treasure. "You spent 20 years buying up politicians and cashing out museum inventories, thinking the men who build the locks would never count the keys." Malik reached up, pulling his platinum master seal pendant from his chest and letting the light catch its laser-etched face. "You didn't just hijack a shipping container tonight, Drake. You attempted to steal from the fleet manager." Drake's eyes went wide, his aristocratic composure completely shattering as he recognized the platinum medallion, the supreme curator. The multi-billion-dollar phantom who owned the title deeds to every commercial cargo vessel, every deep-water berth, and the very digital infrastructure that allowed international trade to exist. "No," Drake whispered, backing away until his spine hit the cold steel of the shipping container. You're a dock worker. You're a nobody from the cargo lines. I am the man who built the dock you hide in, Malik murmured, his amber eyes locking onto the billionaire with the terrifying finality of a king passing judgment. And tonight, your ledger is balanced. The crimson light pulsing against the corrugated steel walls of warehouse 12 cast long, distorted shadows that looked like bars of a cage closing around Harrison Drake. The billionaire corporate raider squeezed the stolen ink and sun disk against his black cashmere overcoat, his knuckles white, his breath whistling through his teeth in sharp, panicked gas. "Kill them," Drake shrieked, his voice losing its polished boardroom refinement and fracturing into pure desperation. "Use the blades. Use your bare hands. I will double your offshore accounts. £5 million each to anyone who takes this old man down." The mercenaries, realizing their high-tech firearms were nothing but expensive blocks of composite plastic, drew long, tactical steel combat knives from their vests. They split into two groups, moving with calculated, military efficiency to flank Malik's massive frame. Malik did not flinch. He did not step back to shield his son. He simply reached out and caught the lead mercenary's descending wrist mid-air. The kinetic force of the block echoed through the hollow warehouse, like a hammer striking an anvil. With a single, fluid twist of his collar's massive hand, Malik shattered the man's grip, sending the steel knife clattering to the concrete floor before driving his elbow into the mercenary's chest, dropping him instantly into a motionless heap. The remaining guards froze, their blades trembling in the red light. They looked at the towering 6'3" West African giant in the worker's jumpsuit, then at their unconscious leader. The illusion of their tactical superiority evaporated. "Father," Kofi said quietly, his head tilted toward the rear loading docks, his ears tracking a new, heavy vibration echoing from the river outside. "The maritime network has arrived. The perimeter anchors are down." Before Drake could process the boy's words, the concrete floor began to vibrate violently. The glass windows along the upper office partitions shattered outward as a massive, synchronized searchlight array cut through the rain from the Thames riverbank, tearing into the warehouse through the skylights with a blinding, diamond-white intensity. The heavy, automated steel shutters at the rear loading dock were violently ripped outward by high-tensile steel winches. Stepping through the ruined doorway, silenced submachine guns drawn and tactical visors locked into tracking mode, was a full operational unit of the Vanguard Global Maritime Security Force. Behind them, walking with the strict, unyielding posture of a military magistrate, was Chief Inspector Henderson of Interpol's High-Value Heritage Division, accompanied by a dozen federal agents. "Harrison Drake," Henderson's voice boomed through a megaphone, cutting through the storm. "Step away from the artifact. Your entire fleet of transport vessels in the English Channel has been boarded and frozen under international seizure warrants. Drop the asset and put your hands on your head." Drake looked at the tactical forces, then at the Interpol agents, his face an ash-grey mask of pure ruin. He let the heavy gold disc slip from his fingers. It landed back into the velvet lining of the wooden husk with a dull, resonant thud. "This is an illegal corporate ambush." Drake snarled, trying to pull the remains of his billionaire authority around himself, like a tattered rag. "My attorneys will have this entire operation thrown out of the High Court by morning." You cannot freeze a global logistics network based on the word of a common dock worker and a blind child. Inspector Henderson did not look at Drake. He walked straight past the trembling billionaire, stopped exactly 3 paces in front of Malik Beho, and snapped his right hand to his brow in a crisp, reverent military salute. The 12 federal agents behind him instantly followed suit, bowing their heads in deep, profound respect. The perimeter is entirely secure, Dr. Gbeho, Henderson reported, his voice clear and clear. Every shadow account linked to the iron ring across Western Europe has been successfully liquidated by your compliance directive. The genuine artifacts have been intercepted at the Swiss border. We await your final decree. Drake felt his knees turn to water. He stared at the Interpol chief, then at the man in the dirty canvas jumpsuit, Dr. Gbeho, the phantom curator, the supreme financial titan who held the sovereign credit lines of the very nations Drake operated in. Malik slowly stepped forward, his heavy boots crushing the broken remnants of the mercenary's knife. He looked down at the ruined billionaire with amber eyes that held the absolute, freezing finality of an executioner. You thought the dark belonged to the thieves, Harrison, Malik murmured, his deep baritone carrying across the silent, white-lit warehouse. But the dark only belongs to the man who built the walls. The blinding white spotlights from the maritime vessels outside cut through the broken skylights, pinning Harrison Drake to the cold warehouse floor like a specimen under a microscope. The billionaire corporate raider sat huddled against the damp wooden shipping crate, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back with heavy steel restraints. The immense, ancient weight of the solid gold Incan sun disk rested safely in its velvet nest just 3 feet away, its intricate celestial engravings catching the sharp light. This is madness, Drake spat, his voice cracking with a desperate, high-pitched venom as the Interpol agents hauled him to his feet. You think you can just dissolve a multi-billion-dollar investment portfolio? You think the international markets will tolerate a shadow entity freezing global shipping lanes? I have sovereign immunity contracts signed by heads of state. Malik Gbeho did not look down at the screaming man. He slowly walked over to the open crate, his towering 6'3" frame silhouetted against the blinding white glare of the river searchlights. He reached into his navy blue jumpsuit, pulled out a specialized executive terminal, and connected it directly to the automated tracking node built into the crate's steel rim. Julian, Malik spoke into his satellite headset, his deep, rumbling baritone carrying the absolute chill of a winter storm. Execute the structural liquidation protocol across all 5 continents. Pull the operating certificates for every vessel, rail line, and dry dock bearing Harrison Drake's shell companies. Wipe them clean from the international registry. Initiating now, Dr. Gbeho. Julian Vance's voice crackled through the secure audio relay from the Geneva Command Hub. The compliance keys are cycling. In 60 seconds, the iron ring will cease to exist financially. The sovereign immunity contracts are being overridden by the anti-money laundering clauses built into the global maritime treaties you authored. On the terminal screen, millions of data points began to cascade downward in a waterfall of emerald text. Across the globe in Tokyo, Rotterdam, New York, and Hamburg, the automated customs gates of dozens of major seaports locked down simultaneously. High-security bank accounts containing hundreds of millions of pounds were instantly frozen, their balances dropping to absolute zero as the supreme compliance protocols of Vanguard Antiquities Group reclaimed the stolen capital. Harrison Drake watched the scrolling data on the terminal screen, his eyes wide and vacant as his brain desperately tried to process the impossible reality. The massive empire of elite art theft and high society corruption he had spent 30 years building was being systematically pulverized in less than a single minute. He wasn't just being arrested, he was being completely erased from the modern financial world. "No," Drake whispered, his knees buckling completely as the federal agents dragged him toward the open warehouse doors. "No, you can't. I am the elite. I am the elite." "You are a broker who forgot his Harrison," Malik murmured, his amber eyes looking through the man with a terrifying, silent finality. You looked at the people who build your world and thought they were invisible. But the shadows you used to hide your greed are the very shadows I use to guard the truth. The agents dragged the ruined billionaire out into the freezing London rain, his expensive black cashmere overcoat dragging through the diesel-stained mud of the Docklands in full, humiliating view of the maritime security teams. Malik turned back to the wooden work table, his rugged features instantly softening into a look of profound, protective warmth. He reached out and gently laid his massive, calloused hand on his son's shoulder. Kofi stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the retreating sounds of the police sirens fading into the city noise. His long, elegant fingers reached out, hovering just an inch above the shimmering surface of the gold sun disk. He didn't need eyes to feel the immense historical weight radiating from the ancient metal. "It's safe, Father," Kofi whispered, a beautiful, brilliant smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. "The thermal conductivity is pure. The tool marks are ancient. The true soul of the record remains intact." "Because of you, son," Malik said, his filling with a deep, proud warmth that echoed through the quiet, white-lit warehouse. The elite world thought they could trick a blind boy in a basement. They had no idea they were dealing with the true judge of history. Malik reached over to the executive display case, pulling out a custom-made, titanium-reinforced graphic cane, its crest perfectly weighted to match Kofi's posture. He placed it gently into his son's hand. Together, the mechanic-clothed billionaire and his brilliant, blind son walked out of the industrial warehouse and stepped into the rear of the armored Mercedes Pullman. As the heavy vehicle accelerated smoothly away from the dark East London docks, leaving the corrupted ruins of the Iron Ring behind them, the master curator looked out the tinted window at the city lights reflecting off the river. The master architect had secured the treasures of the past, the global trade networks were silent, and the father had claimed his